Well, hello again. Let's do this sample exercise together. Right. The grid below names 15 grammar items. Let's see if we can find them in the text. First one, infinitival clause. Find an infinitival clause. There are several in this text. Let's go right here. Here's an infinitive to say, and all of this, in fact, is infinitival clause. Perhaps, perhaps we need to consider what the clause is. Just remember this now. Clause is based on a verb phrase. And when I say verb phrase, I don't mean verb sentence. I mean verb phrase as in syntagma. Okay? So what is a clause? Well, a clause is based on a verb phrase. The verb could be conjugated or not. That's an infinitive. It could be a gerund. It could be all kinds of things, but it has to meet certain criteria for there to be a clause. If it's a clause, then you can modify the supposedly verbal element with an adverb to say quickly, right? A few words. So you have the possibility of putting an adverb. And then you have to consider the possibility, let's say the possibility of finding a subject, understood or explicit. Well, who says a few words? I would like to say a few words. So the understood subject of to say all of this is identical to the subject of I would like. So you see, to answer this, you would underline all of this or put it in brackets, and you put the number 1, and you'd indicate explicit, and you make a little circle around I with an arrow or something. So I could see that you mean to say that you intend for me to understand that the subject is understood, sorry, not explicit, understood, and it's identical to the subject of I would. Well, that's easy. And there are others. I'm sure you'll find them. What about a gerundive clause? Again, what is a clause? Is there a subject? Where is it? Understood or explicit? What are the end of the text? We've got some easy examples down here. Notice this is the sentence originally. Becoming a bigot or a genius. Becoming a bigot or a genius all depends on which ideas, etc. Okay, so this here, I claim, is a gerundive clause. Now, there's a gerund in it, but just because there's a gerund, that doesn't mean that you have a gerundive clause. What's a clause? Remember, you can modify the verbal or deverbal element with an adverb. Let's try that. Well, I did try that here. Rapidly becoming a bigot or a genius. That works. If I try to modify it with an adjective, it doesn't work. Rapid becoming a bigot, or that does not work. That does not work at all. Okay, now who becomes a bigot or a genius? Well, as I've mentioned before, the understood subject of a gerundive clause is usually arbitrary or generic. So it means something like anyone who does become a bigot or a genius. Now, suppose you want to insist on the explicit subject. You could do this. You could put your explicit subject in the possessive form. So, for example, a child's becoming a bigot or a genius. Some people write or say a child becoming a bigot or a genius. To be perfectly correct, you'll put a child's. Similarly, you could become his becoming a bigot or a genius. Again, in conversation and in some, let's say, less formal types of writing, you can put him, not he, him becoming a bigot or a genius. Now that to me is, in my English, that's substandard, but it's perfectly acceptable to many perfectly respectable people. So I will not censure or condemn it. So you see, this here is if you want to specify the subject of becoming a bigot or a genius. So this item here satisfies the criteria of clausehood. It's a clause. And you see, it can be modified with an adverb, but not with an adjective. Now come over here. Here we've got another gerund, but is this a gerund clause? Is it a clause? Well, let me see. Flourishing comes from the verb to flourish. You have brilliant ideas. Well, that is what flourishes. So you could say that you have subject. It's explicit. But is this really a clause? Well, first of all, notice over here. You can put the article before flourishing of brilliant ideas. But over here, the rapid or the rapidly, no, you can't have it at all. But you can have it here. That tells me that this flourishing is a different animal. It's another animal. And indeed, if I check this, I try to put the adverb, it doesn't work. If I put the adjective, it does work. So the rapid flourishing of brilliant ideas, that form is fine. It's not a clause, though. That's like a noun. Any other noun that you can modify with an adjective. Over here, becoming a bigot or a genius, it can't be it can't be the rapid becoming. So it's not modifiable the way a noun is. So this gerund here is used in one way, and this other gerund is used in another. This is a clause. This is not a clause. Now that looks quite abstruse or complex, but in reality, you'll see that it's always the same pattern. We use gerunds a lot in this way, and we use them a lot in this way as well. And they're different patterns, two distinct patterns, and you'll see that it's not hard to tell them apart. You'll find other ones in this text, in fact. What next? Oh, now we've got something we've talked about a lot. Noun clauses. Noun clauses. Find some noun clauses and say, underline them, identify them with number 3, and then say what kind they are, and say what position they're in the sentence. Are they in the subject position, the object position? Well, let's just take them one at a time. Here, someone says that he would like to say something. Well, he'd like to say a few words. Well, that's not a noun clause. But look what we got here. About whether or not this principle, etc., etc. Okay? In other words, whether or not indicates that all of this here is based on a question, and it's based on a yes-no question. Namely, is the 80-20 principle, etc. It's based on a yes-no question. So to satisfy this here, we'd say, okay, we found number 3. It's all of this, whether or not all of this stuff. It's based on a yes-no question. And where is it in the sentence? Is it in the subject or the object position? Well, he says here, I would like to say, so this is the sentence. I would like to say what? I'd like to say a few words. A few words about what? Well, then about all of this. So in fact, what you have is whether or not, the yes-no clause, as an object of the preposition about. And all of that is a complement of words, a few words. And that is, of course, the object of to say. Now, okay, I wouldn't ask you to do all of that analysis on a test, but I wanted you to hear it at least once, because we have, if you write anything, even if it's not very complicated, you have objects inside of complements inside of like this here. Well, there are many others in this text. There are lots of other ones, other noun clauses. Look here. Recall. Recall what? Well, you recall a statement. While motivation involves 3 main cognitive variables, the Pareto principle seems to be rooted in probability. All of that is a complex statement. And without changing the form of the statement at all, you can make it a noun clause, which follows TH8. Recall, meaning like remember something. Remember what? It's not a question. None of this is a question. It's a statement. How about here? Assumptions. I'd always assumed that, okay? You assume something, you assume a statement. I had always assumed that what? Well, the statement, unmodified, that the former were typically white box, while the latter was black box, etc. So we have several more like this in here. We have noun clauses of various types throughout the text, and they all follow the same kind of pattern. Here's some other ones. That is how the rich have always gotten richer. That is what? That is noun clause. And the noun clause here is based on a question. What kind of question? Yes, no question? Or either or question? Or content question? Content, substance. Well, here's the question. How did the rich always get richer? And you convert that. Notice the word order. How did the rich? This auxiliary has to come before the subject, the rich. So noun clause order doesn't have this, and you just have the subject and the verb. How the rich have always gotten richer. There's another one. Let me see. Isn't there another one in this text? Noun clause based on. Oh, here we go. Look at this sentence here. Any experienced parent knows what kinds of things can and do happen when this fact of life is ignored. Well, what kinds of things can and do happen? Well, that's a question. What kind of things can and do happen? What kind of things? It's a substance question. All right, let's look at something even more interesting. If we go to 4, adjective clauses. Oh dear, what a mess. Are they identifying? Do they comment on words that come before them? Do they comment on clauses that come before them? Are they full? Are they reduced? Are they headed or headless? Well, you know that I'm not going to test you on all of that, but you should know these things. This is my opportunity to show them to you. I'm going to show you a little bit about them. Let's look at this sentence here, or rather this clause. Let's look at this. Okay, today I would like to say a few words about whether or not the 80-20 principle, much discussed since Pareto's 1906 paper, is related to motivation and so on and so on and so on. Okay, so what has been much discussed since Pareto's 1906 paper? Well, it refers to this. In fact, you know, oh dear, what did I do? In fact, you know, much discussed since Pareto's 1906 paper is short for which has been. Now, you see, we can drop this. Because you have the verb to, well, you have the verb to be, sort of. You have the participle be, has been. Well, since you have that verbal constellation in which is part of the paradigm of the verb to be, I am, I have been, he has been, it has been. Okay, this can drop. The verb to be is allowed like this, is involved like this, it can drop. Which has been can drop. It's the same sentence. Today I would like to say a few words about whether or not the 80-20 principle, which has been much discussed since Pareto's 1906 paper, is related to, etc. I believe you have a similar possibility in other languages, like French. Now, my point being here, that you could underline this one. You could say that it is reduced, and you could say that it comments on something. What does it comment on? Well, what has been much discussed? The few words about whether or not? No. It's just this previous noun phrase that comes before that's that is much discussed. Okay, so why the commas? Why the commas? This is to indicate that it's a comment. This is extra illustrative information that you don't absolutely need to put there. You don't need it at all to identify the 80-20 principle. You don't need the adjective clause for that purpose, because the term, the 80-20 principle, is already uniquely and unequivocally identifying the thing that you're talking about. So that means any adjective clause will just be a comment. It's as though I were to put a name here, or a conventional term. Okay. Okay. My mother, much discussed since. Okay. Well, okay, that's uniquely, unequivocally identified. So this here, comma before, don't forget to put the comma afterwards. Let's see if we have any other adjective clauses in here. Well. How about this? I realized that if I had to earn my livelihood, well, no, wait. If this is a statement, and this indicates the realization of said statement, and you're connected with THAT, well, that's a noun clause, not an adjective clause. THAT is not necessarily used for adjective clauses. It's used for noun clauses as well. Noun clauses based on statements. So no, this is another noun clause. You realize something. So that's not what we're looking for. What else have we got? Are there any others? Are there any others? Well, maybe, maybe not. Which chains those will be? What's this here? There are no chains, and no chains, no gains. If Pareto growth is to get underway, some chains need to form. Soon, some of these are longer than others. Which chains those will be is based on which chains will those be, or indeed those chains will be which ones? Well, that's the way a noun clause based on a question, content question works. So no, 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 no. That's not an adjective clause. Are there any others? Well, maybe you better look, because I can't find them. There's just this one down here. Look at this. That's an adjective clause. And again, it looks like it's a comment. See the comma? Comma for comment. It often occurs in cases like this that by the time we realize how very wrong our assumptions have been, we have already built up a great wall of China of assumptions, the wrong-headedness of which is hard to recognize, etc. Well, all of this is a comment on assumptions. We've already identified the assumptions. They're uniquely and unequivocally identified. But then we say something more about them. They are very wrong-headed. Okay, wrong-headed, heading in the wrong direction. They're mistaken. They're lost. So the wrong-headedness of which, what is which? Which stands for the assumptions. Which is a pronoun. We use which. We don't use whom. The wrong-headedness of whom. That's impossible. That's impossible because this is for humans and this is for non-humans. All right then. Let's look quickly at what we've got left here to do. Adjective clauses. I couldn't find any identifying adjective clauses. Maybe there are some in here. I also couldn't find any that comment on the previous clause. There may be some and I've just missed them. You can check. Now let's talk about conditionals. Real conditionals versus non-real conditionals. Let me see. We're looking for a real conditional. How about this here? When or if, both are possible, when this fact of life is ignored, what kind of things can and do happen? Well, certain things can and do happen. So this here would be the clause causation, and this here would be the clause of result or effect. So when this fact of life, or if this fact of life is ignored, things happen. Let's simplify it like that. This is a complex example because the clause of result happens to be a noun clause. Yeah. Now, how about a non-real conditional? Here's one here. I realized something. That means that I'm realizing I'm realizing a noun clause. The noun clause, in this case, happens to be an adjective clause. I realized what? I realized that if I had to earn my livelihood in that field, that is to say, popular epistemology, well, I might be spending more of my vacation time at the Salvation Army than on the French Riviera. If, notice, if I had to, had, notice the simple past. So this is the cause clause, and this is the result. It's non-real. Notice that you have only three possibilities in the non-real causal result. You can have might, you can have could, you can have would. Well, and you can also have would be able. And a long time ago, you also had the possibility of using should. We don't do that anymore. In contemporary English, that's no longer used. But these four, might, could, would be able, they are still used. They're the only ones in the non-real conditional clause. If I had to earn my livelihood, I might, I could, I would be able to, whatever. So that's that one here. You see? You underline it or you put it in brackets and you indicate which clause is the condition and which is the result. Oh, one last thing. Notice this. You have if here. Well, in the real condition clause, remember down here? Let's look at it again. When or if this fact of life is ignored, you have a choice there. You could put when or you could put if. You have a choice. But you don't have that choice with the non-real conditional clauses. You don't. Try to put when here and see if it works. I'm telling you it doesn't. When I had to earn my livelihood in that field, I might be able, no, that doesn't work. No good. All right, now let's talk about the present perfect and these time words. In this text, these four items are pretty closely related. Start right here in the first sentence. Today I'd like to say a few words about whether or not the 80-20 principle, much discussed since Pareto's 1906 paper, is related to motivation, and so on. We pointed out before that this here is understood. In fact, it was absent in the original text. Now, it's okay. I'm going to put it back. We know that this is the so-called present perfect, or let's say the non-past, no modal perfect tense. And this is since. Since indicates the point. Now, what does it say here? We're looking for a time word that marks the end of the former period, the past finished period, and introduces the current period. Right. So there's only one word that does exactly that in English, and that's the word since. Since originally meant from this place forward. It used to be spatial. And we have other words which are now becoming archaic. You still find them in some kinds of documents, especially legal contracts and legal contracts, well, contracts, that sort of thing, legal documents. But you don't see them much elsewhere. But in the past, they existed, and they were hence, whence, thence. These words have almost disappeared. The word hence is still used. It's used in speech by many people to mean the same thing as therefore. It means literally from this thing that I've just said, I make this conclusion. That's how the word hence is used. And it's related to the word since. And since originally meant from this place onward. Well, in modern English, and for some time, this word since has had a meaning in time, not place. It's not used for places anymore, usually. It'd be very strange, actually. It's used for time. And so if I say, since I moved back to Quebec, right away you understand that I mean that I am in Quebec now. And there was a point before which I was not in Quebec, and a point, that same point, after which I was in Quebec, came to be in Quebec, and I'm still in Quebec. So that means that since puts an end, it marks the end of the period when I was not in Quebec, and it marks the beginning of the current period with me right here in Quebec. That's the meaning of since. It means a lot more than just depuis or Spanish desde. It means much more than those words. It's narrower, it's more specific, you could say. So here, Pareto's 1906 paper is taken as a point. Before that point, obviously people were not discussing the 80-20 principle. But after that point, and up until now, after that point and up until now, that's what we mean when we say since, it has been much discussed. You can't use any other conjugation here. It's the so-called present perfect. So to answer the question here, let me see. Find that time word. Okay, it's the word since. So you underline it here and you put number 10. And what verb is affected in what conjugation? Well, this is the verb that's affected, and it's in the so-called present perfect. Even if it's elided, dropped, which it can be, it's still understood. If you were to put it back, if anyone were to paraphrase this and they put that back, they'd have to put back a present perfect. No choice. Well, what are the other ones? Okay, so we've got time words, looking forward and looking backward. What on earth is that now? Well, let's look down here. Someone has long insisted there's a present perfect. I'm looking for a time word. Time word. Oh my. I can't find it. Oh, how about this here? Until I saw those YouTube clips. There we go. YouTube clips. I can pronounce it. Until I saw those YouTube clips, I had always assumed, all right, well, until I saw those YouTube clips, that means before I saw the YouTube clips and up to the point when I saw them. So until means more than just before. It means all the time before. So in all the time before I saw those YouTube clips, I had always assumed that these were this and those were the other. That doesn't matter, just pointing. I had always assumed something. Notice this, past perfect. That's a compound tense. The compound tenses are to indicate something that comes before, happens before, or starts before something else, a point. And that point is this one here. The point when I saw those YouTube clips. So up to that point, that's what the until means. I had always assumed. Okay, so you've got this here, this conjugation, compound conjugation, which indicates, because it's compound, it indicates the thing, the situation, the condition, the event, whatever it was that came before. I had always assumed something until I saw the YouTube clips. Then when I saw the YouTube clips, I didn't make those assumptions anymore. That's how we use the word until. I hope you remember this now. There's something else about until that you need to keep in mind. Here, try this. Until the nurse called me. All right. I read a magazine until the nurse called me. Yeah, so I was sitting in the waiting room and I read a magazine. So this is what was happening before, all the time before this happened. I read a magazine and she called me. Well, I read or had read. There's a slight difference in meaning. In this case, it's not important, so I'll remove that for the moment. But that's not what I want to show you. Here's what I want to show you. I read a magazine until the nurse called me. Try this. I read 3 magazines until she called me. Well, that's interesting. I want to know whether you think that's all right. I read 3 magazines until she called me. You know, it's possible, but it's weird. It's possible, but it's weird. And the reason it's weird is because, well, let me show you why. Ate 3 sandwiches. Ate 3 sandwiches until she called me. Well, that is so strange that I would say it's wrong or it's almost impossible. Why? Because this word until, it means before, but there's an extra meaning. It means that there was something constant, a constant situation, a continuous activity, or a steady state, which changed at this point until time point X. Time point X is the nurse called me. So until that time point, here's what the condition was. Here's what the activity was. Here's what the situation was. The situation was reading a magazine. Now look, if you say, I read 3 magazines until she called me, that implies strange things. Well, it could imply you read 1 magazine and then a second one and then a third one, but that wouldn't work here. That wouldn't work. You'd have to have the word before. I read 3 magazines before she called me. Well, that would be okay. But this here would be strange. And here's why. If you say, what I was doing constantly in a steady fashion up until the moment when she called me was read 3 magazines, that implies that you were reading the 3 magazines at the same time. That's not impossible, but it's kind of odd, isn't it? I mean, sounds like a cool trick. I wish I could do it. How about this here? I ate 3 sandwiches until she called me. Up until this, this point, this time point X, that's what the meaning of until is. Here was my steady, constant condition. I was eating 3 sandwiches. I was eating 3 sandwiches at the same time, I guess. That's kind of strange. All right, enough of that. Let's look at this one down here. Somewhere down here, we've got another one. Where is it? Ah, it often occurs in cases like this that by the time we realize how wrong our assumptions are, something happens. Or something has already happened, sorry. Well, that's interesting. Let's look at that. No, bigger than that, so I can see it. Yes, okay, so by the time I saw those clips, I had already formed various foolish assumptions. There, okay, there's an example. In other words, something like this. You have 2 events here. You have 2 events. One is seeing the clips, and the other one is forming assumptions. Notice this. First, you did this. You formed your assumptions, and then you saw the clips. We don't always do this, but we like to do it. It makes things clearer. Had formed must come before saw. There's no choice. When we have a sentence like this composed of 2 clauses, each clause has its own verb. We like the verbs to be coordinated in this way. So the thing that happened first or started first will be in the compound conjugation, had formed. And the second thing is in the simple conjugation. In this case, past and past. Simple past and past perfect. By the time I saw those clips, I'd already formed foolish assumptions. I had already, let me say, eaten 3 tacos de perro. I had already let me see, I'd already been married for years, etc. You have all these kinds of things that can come before this time. Why not simply say before? Why not simply say before? Well, it doesn't quite mean the same thing, because by time x doesn't only mean before time x. It also means that looking back from time x, here's what you see. Here's what you've accumulated, or here's what you've lost, or here's how much time has passed, or here's what you've accomplished, and so on like that. It's not the same as before. It's as though you were saying that something was supposed to happen before something else. But one thing got there first. One thing got there before the other. So by the time I saw those clips, I had already formed various assumptions. In other words, the assumptions beat the race. They got to me before the clips did. So this is not the same thing. It's similar, but not identical. Well, then we can go through these quickly. These are interesting and not difficult. They're good things to know about. So if we take 11, we're looking at various kinds of connectors. Well, this text is full of them, and I'll let you find them and use your dictionaries to check and double check them. But I want to make at least a comment on this connector here, as. As. Okay. Why as? Why not like? Why not? Let's look at the sentence. Today I'd like to say a few words about whether or not the 80-20 principle, which has been much discussed since Pareto's 1906 paper, is related to motivation, as Dan Pink and others before him have analyzed it, like Dan Pink and others before him have analyzed it. Well, this is what my students often would put, like, and this is what I always correct them for, sorry. Now, you'll hear speakers of English say things like I said, it happened just like I said it would, and so on. Well, modern and contemporary English, this isn't entirely wrong, but I want you to learn this. Let me put this here somewhere for you. Okay. Like, plus, let's say, usually a noun, as, usually a clause. Examples? Examples. He works like a slave. Comparison. Not calling him a slave. You're saying that's what he's like a slave. As is usually followed by a clause. But if you have as followed by a noun, careful, doesn't mean what you sometimes seem to think it does mean. It's something like this. Look. He works as a, let's say a slave. He works as a slave, meaning his position, as though he had a job. Okay, so we probably won't talk about slavery in that context, but we could say he works, I don't know, he works as a stevedore. Do I know how to pronounce, do I know how to spell stevedore? I think it's stevedore. I think that's how you spell it. Stevedore. I think that's how you spell it. We'll check later. He works as a stevedore. That's his job. Now, otherwise, as is followed by a clause. It all happened as I had predicted. There you go. Now, you'll often hear people say things like, it all happened like I predicted. I have not heard people use the past perfect here. I don't know why. Okay, this here, I'm marking with a question mark and an asterisk because you might find it unusual or you might find it completely unacceptable depending on who you are and the situation that you're in. This is the English you will hear. You will hear. And of course, you'll pick it up on YouTube and other American movies and so on like that. But actually, this is the form that I'd like you to learn first. And the other forms you can learn later. But this is the way we say this in the book English, academic and professional English. Right. Now, what about the modals? We can do this quickly. The modals, what's the first one? Number 12, modal of reasonable expectation and belief. Well, the modal of reasonable expectation and belief is should. Yeah. Well, that's not the example that I want you to see for a moment. This one. All right. Let's blow that up a bit so we can examine it. So which chains those will be is determined randomly at the beginning of the experiment. It is the rest of the progression that should be predictable, should be, and quite often is, should be, in the sense not obligation or duty, but in the sense that we can reasonably expect this to be true. Yeah. Well, all right. What else have we got here? 13. Modal, objectively expressing possibility. Well, in my mind, may is a standard. And we've got an example of that here. No, we're not there yet. Here. We've got an example of that here. Let's look at it closely. So that is how the rich have always gotten richer, and may be how certain things in our mind take up more and more room. Meaning, and it is possible, this is not just an impression or personal opinion, it is objectively possible that this is how certain things in our mind take up so much room. Notice this? These are two words. It may be. These are two words. It is possible that it is. That's what this means. This is not the same. It's unrelated. Well, historically related, but not closely related to the word maybe. May be and maybe are not the same animal. All right, let's go back upstairs. What have we got here? Intransitive verb, something you do, versus something that happens to you. So find an intransitive verb, that's one, and then decide whether that intransitive verb, find an intransitive verb and then decide whether it denotes something that you do or something that happens to you. Well, I'll let you find it. Let me explain with examples what I mean by that. It's really very simple and a very good thing to know if you're ever going to write text. Let's say intransitive verbs. Intransitive. Right. We'll make two groups, okay? Why don't we put in a little table? I love these little tables. They're completely useless, but I love playing with them. Just to show that I sort of know how. Two columns, and let's say, what is fila? I can't remember. Well, that's a row, right? Yeah, I want 5 rows, and let me see. I want them smaller. Auto ajusta. What does that mean? Oh, auto adjust to the content. All right, here we go. There we go. Okay, so look at this. Look at this. Let's try sleep. Let's try, let's put fall down. Let's put, okay, die. Sneeze. I need another row here, damn it. Insert. Yeah. And let's put cough. All right. Those are intransitive. Intransitive verbs means they speak of one person or thing or animal. I don't know. Let's say entity, okay? Keep it easy. Keep it simple. Speak of one entity. In other words, no objects. No objects. No direct or indirect objects. Okay, so you don't sleep something, you just sleep. You don't fall down a thing, you fall down. You die. You sneeze. You cough. Okay, how about this? Then we have, let me see. Let me see. Let me see. We've got walk. We've got run. We've got look. What else have we got? What else have we got? Lie down. Yeah, let's put it here. Fall down versus lie down. Walk, lie down, look, run, and you know something? Cough. Okay, so this is what? Well, these are both intransitive verbs. They don't take objects, there's just a subject, right? But what is going on here? You've got two types of intransitive verbs here. One type is about things that you do. And the other type is about things that happen to you. They aren't really things that you do. This is approximate, of course, but this is actually pretty important if you're writing. If you want to express yourself clearly, you have to feel this difference. So you could fall down deliberately, but you have to add the adverb deliberately, because otherwise it's kind of strange. Normally you don't fall down on purpose. And you don't usually decide to die. You can decide to die. Okay, I didn't mean to suggest anything there, but normally death is something that happens to you. And it comes when it wants to. It doesn't necessarily come when you do. How about a sneeze? Well, you can tickle your nose. You can deliberately provoke a sneeze, but I mean, why? Some people do that. I think it's fun. Coughing. Coughing is usually involuntary. Sleeping. Sleeping is something that we don't really control. It is more or less something that happens to us. I would say that these here are intransitives, all of them, but they're about things that happen to you. Some kind of force affects you, makes you cough, makes you sneeze. It makes you die, it makes you fall down. Could be bad luck, it could be anything. It makes you sleep. It could be what makes you sleep, I don't know. That's a mystery. Fatigue makes you sleep. That doesn't really explain it. It's not exactly something you do in a voluntary fashion. But how about these here? You walk, okay? You are the one who initiates the walking. You lie down, same. You look, that's voluntary. You run, that's something that you do. It's not something that happens to you, usually. But if you run in a mad panic, exceptionally, you could say, no, running can also be something that happens to you instead of something that you do. And how about coughing? Well, we know very well that coughing can be involuntary and it can be on purpose too. So that one's ambiguous. So I just wanted you to look at the text and find these if you can. If you can't, keep looking in other texts. Keep your antenna on, because these distinctions actually become really important when you're writing. How about a passive verb in the subjunctive mode? Okay, here's something else I'll never test you on, but I just want you to know about it. Where was it now? Something about insistence. Insistence. Here we go. Here we go. Now this is interesting. You can turn the clip off now if you don't really want to hear about the subjunctive in English, but the subjunctive does exist. Of course, I will not test you on this. But let's see now. We've got this verb to insist. Let me insist on this word because it's important here. And the word insist also comes back somewhere else, doesn't it? Here. Okay. Let's call it insist 1 and insist 2. Insist 1. These people, these researchers insist that, and here's the noun clause. Here's the noun clause. Many or no few former classical black box researchers now insist that, okay, their work be considered zebroid, meaning a mix of black and white. Okay. Why doesn't it say is? Interesting. Then down here, while many a standard white box worker or laboratory has long insisted wistfully that he, she, or it has been striped all along. Why doesn't it say here? It doesn't. It doesn't say be striped. It says has been striped. Let me give you a simple example and you'll understand right away. He insisted that his wife sees a dentist. Question. You tell me right now. Which one? Did you answer one or the other, depending on the context? If so, you should go to the fridge and pour yourself something nice to drink, because you deserve it. He insisted that his wife sees a dentist. We call that indicative mode. Indicative mode simply means we're saying that it's so. It doesn't have to be true, but we're saying it as though it were true. He insisted that what? Noun clause. The noun clause can be in the indicative mode. He insisted that she sees a dentist, meaning, let's say that this is 2, and let's say this is 1. Because I'm so organized, I will give you the meaning of 2 before I give you the meaning of 1. All right? Meaning, he says it is absolutely true. He insisted, he said that. He said that it is absolutely true. She does see a dentist. Why doesn't your wife see a dentist? If she's in so much pain, why doesn't she see a dentist? And the husband answered, well, yes, but she does see a dentist. She does. That's the meaning of insist in that case. What's this, though? He insisted that his wife see a dentist. That means absolutely would not accept her not seeing one. Okay. He said that it's absolutely true that she does see one, versus he absolutely would not accept her refusal to see one. So this here, that's subjunctive. This here is indicative. Now I notice here that we have something even more complicated. We have a passive verb in the subjunctive mode. So we found something in the subjunctive mode, but that was active. We want something passive. Right, so what about a passive subjunctive? Here's something else I'll never test you on. But when you're writing, something that you'll need. Requirements. Requirement. To require, requires, calls for THET plus a noun clause. Now I want you to look at this noun clause. This noun clause is a bit unusual. Let me see. What was the context? In other words, parents, for example, need to bear in mind that those first paperclip chains need not be left to form randomly. They can and must be diligently forged and lined up with deliberate, consistent care. Sadly, and here's our sentence, there is no requirement that new parents be or are trained in the basics of puericultural epistemology. Okay, never mind this. This is just a joke, okay? This is the interesting part. Do you put be or do you put are? If you put the conjugated verb, that's the indicative mode. New parents are trained in the basics of puericultural epistemology. You're just saying it's an affirmation, it's a statement. New parents be, well, you see, requirement, that, it calls for a subjunctive. Something like in French, I can't think of what this would be in French at the moment. You would use your subjunctive in a similar context in French. So you would not say, there's no requirement that new parents are trained. That's impossible. You have to say this. There's no requirement that new parents be trained.